The ham was the same ham. That was the first thing I noticed. The same oval platter, the same ring of pineapple slices my mother had been arranging since 1987, the same small bowl of cloves she set beside it in case anyone wanted to stud the meat themselves, which no one ever had. It was Easter Sunday, and I had driven the 40 minutes from our house to my parents' house off Augusta Road, knowing that I had a diagnosis in my coat pocket, that I had not yet told my sister, and that I would not be telling her today. My father, Dennis, was at the head of the table. He passed the rolls without being asked, which was unusual. He had always been a man who required asking. My mother apologized for the gravy. It had gone a little thin, she said. She should have started the roux earlier. She wasn't sure what happened, and I watched the table receive this apology in the usual way, which was to say nothing and eat the gravy, which was fine. It was always fine. Grace Gagne had been apologizing for perfectly adequate food for as long as any of us had been alive, and the rest of us had learned that the right response was to keep eating. Zelda's boys excused themselves after the main course, Tyler first, and then Marcus following his brother with the specific purposefulness of a child who has learned that leaving is more efficient than being released. My brother-in-law Greg had driven separately, something about stopping by the office, and had not arrived. There was a seat at the table where he would have been, and no one mentioned it. After dessert, while my father was in the back part of the house doing something that required him to leave and close the door behind him, Zelda set a leather folder on the table beside her coffee cup. She said she had a few things for Mom to look at. Nothing urgent, just some paperwork she'd been meaning to bring over. I helped clear the plates. This was the division of labor that had existed since childhood, as naturally organized as the positions on a sports team. Zelda handled the planning, and I handled the mess. I stacked the dessert plates and carried them to the kitchen, and when I came back for the second load, my mother was already at the sink, and Zelda had the folder open on the kitchen table and was pointing to something on a page with one finger, and talking in a low, warm, continuous murmur I couldn't fully hear from where I stood in the doorway. My mother dried her hands on the dish towel that lived on the oven handle and took the pen Zelda was holding out to her. I stood in the doorway with a bread basket in each hand. I could see the top half of the page, the word trust and some numbers and a notary block already stamped, but I couldn't see the signature lines. My mother signed twice. Zelda said something I didn't catch and closed the folder. I put the bread baskets down on the counter and said I should probably get back. Paul was home with Sophie, I said. Sophie had a project due. Zelda walked me to my car. She talked about Tyler's spring lacrosse schedule, about the new addition on the Hendersons' house 3 doors down, which she found excessive. She opened her trunk to load the leftover dishes, and when she closed it, I caught her expression in the half-second before she composed it back into her usual face. It was small and private and satisfied, the way a face looks when something has landed the way it was meant to land. She turned and smiled and said to drive safe. I thought about that expression for 6 weeks. The surgery was scheduled for the 17th. On the 6th, at 7:20 in the morning, my phone rang and it was Zelda saying she was so sorry but she'd woken up with strep. Her throat was on fire. She couldn't drive me to pre-op and risk exposing me 11 days before a surgery. She'd be useless to me. I understood. I did not say what I was thinking, which was that pre-op was not the surgery, and strep tests were available at the CVS Minute Clinic in under 20 minutes. I said, of course, feel better. I sat at the kitchen island for a moment after I hung up, and then I called my mother. My mother appeared at my front door 40 minutes later in her good coat, the charcoal wool one she wore to church and funerals, carrying a plaid thermos and a Patricia Cornwell paperback. She said she thought I might want tea. In the waiting room at the surgery center, she sat beside me and held my hand the way she had held it when I was 9, and the vet was explaining what was going to happen to our dog Rufus, whose back legs had finally stopped working. There was no pressure in it and no instruction. She was just there, her hand over mine, the way you'd put a paperweight on something in case of wind. She said, his phone is always face down now. When he's at the table, he didn't used to do that. I looked at her. She was looking at the middle distance, at the chairs across the waiting room, at nothing in particular. She said, I don't know why I'm telling you that. I suppose I've been noticing it. A nurse appeared at the door and called my name. I don't remember going under. I remember the ceiling tiles, which were a grid of small perforations arranged in a pattern. My brain kept trying to make symmetrical. And then I don't remember anything until I was in recovery and Paul's hand was on my forearm and there was a voice, not his, explaining something about the drain. The drain was a bulb the size of a small pear that collected fluid and had to be measured and emptied twice a day. There was also a dressing that would need to be changed every 48 hours. There was a white pill every 6 hours. There was the fact that my left arm could not be raised above my collarbone, not even to reach the bedside table, which I discovered at 2 in the morning and filed away with the careful neutrality I had been applying to most of the information I had received over the previous 6 weeks. Zelda did not come. A text at 11, still running a fever. Doctor says stay home. Thinking of you every minute. I showed it to Paul and set my phone face down on the blanket. My mother was still in her good coat at 9 that evening. She had been in my hospital room for 6 hours, and at some point she had stopped sitting in the chair beside me and was perched at the edge of the bed, and she was moving her hand slowly through my hair without appearing to be aware of it. I watched the ceiling and felt her hand and did not say anything. Paul told me later that when she'd gone down to feed the parking meter at 6 o'clock, he'd watched from my window and seen her sit in her car in the lot afterward for nearly 20 minutes, both hands on the steering wheel, not going anywhere. He didn't know what she was thinking. He hadn't asked. He said he'd felt like he was seeing something he wasn't supposed to see. At 4:17 in the morning on the second day, my phone buzzed on the bedside table on my left side. Where I had put it before I understood what I would not be able to do. It buzzed in long stretches, not single calls but calls in sequence, the screen lighting up and dimming and lighting up again. I could not lift my arm to reach it. I watched it until it stopped. In the morning, the missed calls were from a number I didn't recognize with a Tampa area code. 6 days after surgery, my phone rang at 6:47 in the morning. It was my mother. Her voice was doing something careful and concentrated, a kind of internal bracing I recognized from the 3 times in my life she had called me with bad news. She said a man had come to the door at 6 o'clock. He had an envelope. She had been in her dressing gown. I asked her to lock the front door and not sign anything. I asked her to put the envelope on the kitchen table unopened. I asked her to make herself a cup of tea and not call anyone. I asked her to call me back in 15 minutes. She said, "Carrie, am I in some kind of trouble?" I said, "No, I'll call you back." 3 minutes after we hung up, Zelda called. I declined the call. She called again. I declined it again. I lay in the recliner with the heating pad pressed against my left side, where the drain was, and I scrolled through my contacts to a name I had not dialed in 11 years. Helen Silva picked up on the first ring. I had worked 1 summer in her office when I was 24, between the end of my first year of law school and the beginning of my second, before I decided the law was not what I wanted and left to study communications, and eventually became the kind of person who explains hospital systems to the press. Helen had sent a Christmas card every year since. I had always sent one back. I had never asked myself, until that morning, why I had kept her number. I said, "Helen, this is Carrie Gagney. I don't know if you remember me." She said, "Of course I do. Talk to me." She called on the following Tuesday afternoon. I was in the recliner with the heating pad at my back and the drain bulb on the side table and Paul's coffee cup from that morning still on the kitchen island because I had not yet been able to carry it to the sink. She had been efficient, which was what I had needed her to be. She said, "Your father has been wiring $4,000 on the first business day of every month for 47 months to a Florida LLC called Palmetto Point Holdings. The sole member of that LLC is a woman named Catherine Voss, born 1961, registered address in St. Petersburg. The total transferred to date is $188,000. I wrote the number on the notepad I kept beside the recliner. I wrote it again underneath. She said, "The wire instructions were not entered from your father's terminal. They were entered from a residential cable modem with the billing address in Wade Hampton Estates. The cable account is registered to Zelda Gagne. I held the phone against my shoulder and looked at what I had written on the notepad. She said, I need you to come in Thursday if you're able. On Wednesday, I drove to my parents' house. I was 8 days post-surgery, which meant I was mobile and I could drive short distances if I was careful, and I needed to see my mother's face. Zelda was already there. I heard the dishwasher before I opened the door. She had that specific competence with my mother's kitchen, with its particular geography of drawer pulls and cabinet hinges that comes from a lifetime of proximity. She was wearing rubber gloves and had a sponge in one hand, and when I came in, she turned and looked at me with an expression that was warm and worried and carefully proportioned. And she guided me by my good arm to the chair at the end of the kitchen table, the one positioned at the elbow of the counter, as if I were a much older woman who needed situating. She had put out a glass of water for me. I drank some of it. Later, in the hallway by the utility cupboard, she lowered her voice and told me that Greg's company was in the middle of layoffs, that she hadn't been sleeping, that Tyler had asked her 2 weeks ago whether she was sick. She said it carefully, not performing, just placing it in front of me the way you'd set something fragile on a table and wait to see if the surface held. Her voice went thin for a moment, a single hairline crack quickly sealed. She said, I just want Mom to be okay. Whatever else is happening, I just want her to be okay through all of this. She put her hand on my left arm, the arm with the drain. I let her keep it there for 3 seconds. I was counting. Then I shifted just enough, and she moved her hand. I thanked her for cleaning up, and I went to find my mother. Helen's office was on the 3rd floor of a building that had been a savings bank in a former life. It still had the original woodwork and a specific smell of old paper that I had always associated with serious things being decided in an orderly way. I sat across from her desk, and she set a manila folder in front of me and a speakerphone on the desk, and dialed a number. The voice on the phone was calm and technical. It confirmed the MAC address of the cable modem. It confirmed the residential account. It said the name again. Helen opened the folder. She walked me through the revocable transfer on death deed, which had been executed with my mother's signature and Zelda's as witness, and filed at the county recorder 4 days after Easter Sunday. She showed me the amendment to the family trust that removed my name as a beneficiary and replaced it with Zelda's. She showed me an email chain between Zelda and my father going back 39 months. Most of it was logistical day, amount, the occasional note about the routing number having been updated. The last exchange was from the February before my surgery. Did you remember the May payment? She'll be expecting it. My father's reply, thanks, honey, you're a lifesaver. Helen set the folder down and looked at me. She said, one question. Did your sister know about your diagnosis before the Easter documents were filed? I said yes. I had told her in early March. I had called her before I called anyone else because that was the order things were supposed to go. Helen nodded. She did not say anything. She let the information sit in the room between us, and she let me sit with it too. After a while, she said, let me show you what we're going to do. She came on Friday, 10 days post-surgery. She rang the doorbell, which she had never done in the 20 years she had been walking in and out of my house. I opened the door and she came in and sat on the sofa in the front room and crossed her legs and set her bag beside her feet. She did not ask about the drain. She did not ask about the dressing. She did not ask about the medication or the arm or the follow-up appointment that was in 4 days. She said she knew. An attorney had been pulling our father's financial records. She said she knew this was hard, that everything was hard right now. And she understood why I might be looking for answers. But she wanted me to understand that what I was doing, opening a financial investigation, while our mother was at her most fragile, while I was supposed to be recovering, was going to hurt Grace more than it would help her. She said she didn't want to have to explain to our mother that Carrie was going through Dad's accounts while Carrie was still supposed to be in bed recovering from surgery. She said she hoped I could hear how that would look. Her voice was level the whole time. There was no crack in it. She had prepared this. I could see the preparation in the way she held herself, the particular stillness of someone who has rehearsed the scene without an audience. She said, I think you should let this go. Then she stood up, and she picked up her bag, and she let herself out through the front door. I heard the gravel when she pulled out of the drive. I picked up my phone and called Helen. Saturday night. Paul sat to my right at the kitchen island. My mother sat at the corner table where we put the things that had no permanent home: Paul's mail, Sophie's chargers, a basket of twine and scissors, but which was clear now because Paul had cleared it, and my mother was sitting there with 8 iron napkins in her lap, folding them. One fold lengthwise, then a corner brought to a point. She made the crease with her thumbnail, the way she had always done. Helen was on speakerphone against the toaster. She walked us through the injunction on the trust amendment, the criminal referral for wire fraud and elder financial abuse, the revocation of the durable power of attorney that my mother had signed at the kitchen sink on Easter Sunday, while I stood in the doorway holding bread baskets. She explained the order of operations for the following morning. The notary would come at 9. My mother would sign the revocation documents and the new designation forms, and then we would have Sunday lunch. My mother listened. She did not ask Helen to slow down. She asked 2 clarifying questions, both precise. The notary came at 9. My mother signed everything with the pen she kept in the kitchen drawer, the one with the hospital logo on it that she had been using for important documents for as long as I could remember. When she handed the pen back to me, she looked tired in a specific way, not weakened, just finished with something. She gathered the 8 folded napkins and brought them to the island and set them in front of me. She said, "Set the table at my house in the morning. Blue plates, the glasses with the gold rim, don't change anything. That's how she'll come in." The dogwood in my mother's front yard had been at its best 4 days earlier. It was past peak now, but still holding, the white bracts thinning at the edges, the lawn below it specked with fallen petals that looked deliberate from a distance. Grace had the casserole in the oven before I arrived. Aunt Judy was already at her usual chair at the far end of the table, the one she had occupied at every meal in this house for 30 years, her coffee cup in front of her, not talking, watching the room with her particular economy of motion. She and I looked at each other when I came in, and she gave me a nod that meant she knew. The sealed envelope from the county prosecutor's office sat behind the low glass vase of tulips at the center of the table. I had put it there when I arrived. It was visible if you looked at the table. Zelda would look at the table. She arrived at 12:15 with a ceramic dish of sweet potato casserole and a specific energy, cheerful, slightly compressed, moving at the pace of a person who has decided on a version of events and has committed to it. She said hello to Aunt Judy. She said the yard looked beautiful. She asked if the ham was from Publix or the butcher in Pleasantburg. We sat down. My mother served. Zelda had her second bite of ham before she said it. She said she'd been thinking, and she wanted to float something just for conversation. She said with everything that had happened lately, with Dad being in Florida and the estate picture being unclear, she thought it might make sense, just on paper, nothing would change practically, to deed the house to herself. For protection, she said, just so there was clarity about where things stood. She looked at my mother. She said, "You wouldn't feel a thing. It would just clean things up." I opened the folder. I set it on the table between my plate and the tulip vase. I did not stand up. I did not raise my voice. I read the wire amounts from the beginning. The first transfer dated 39 months prior, $4,000 to Palmetto Point Holdings, LLC, Catherine Voss, sole member, St. Petersburg, Florida. Then the second. Then the third. I read them in order, 47 of them. When I reached the Easter document, I read the filing date, the county recorder number, and the 2 lines that specified the beneficiary change. When I reached the IP address and the cable modem account registration, I read that too. I read the name on the account. I set the page down. Zelda said, "This is not what it looks like." I waited. She said, "Dad asked me to set those transfers up. He wanted to help someone he knew, and he didn't want Mom to know about it. I was helping him. That's all I was doing." Aunt Judy looked at the tablecloth. Zelda said, "The estate documents were Dad's idea. He came to me. He thought it was the fairest arrangement given how involved I've been." I watched her. She looked at me, then she looked at our mother. She said, "Mom, you know how much I do for this family. You know what the last 3 years have looked like. I've been here every day." Carrie has her own life. That's not a criticism, it's just the reality of the situation, and I don't think it's wrong to. My mother set her fork down. She said, Karen. She said it the way she said everything, quietly and with complete intention. She said, I read the documents. I'd like you to leave. Zelda opened her mouth. She looked at Aunt Judy, who was looking at the tablecloth. She looked at me. She picked up her purse from the floor beside her chair, and she carried her sweet potato casserole to the kitchen counter, and she went out through the back door. The latch caught cleanly. None of us moved for a while. The casserole was still in the oven. The tulips were still in the vase. Aunt Judy picked up her fork. 2 years later, my mother's house is her own. She rents it to a young couple. He teaches at the middle school on Woodruff Road. She is doing something in graphic design from home, who have a new baby and a Labrador retriever named something I can never remember. My mother drives past once a season to check the gutters, which she insists on doing herself because she doesn't trust anyone else to tell her if the flashing is beginning to lift. She says they keep the yard better than Dennis ever did. Zelda pleaded to a single count of wire fraud, reduced from 5. Restitution, 3 years probation, no jail time. Catherine Voss testified in exchange for reduced civil exposure and gave them the email documentation, which was more comprehensive than anything Helen's investigator had assembled. The $188,000 is being repaid at $4,000 on the first business day of every month to a trust account in my mother's name. Helen arranged it that way on purpose. She told me she liked a tidy symmetry. It has been 11 months since any of us heard from Zelda. Her boys send my mother a Christmas card each year, a school photo printed on cardstock, Tyler and Marcus in whatever their current version of dressed up looks like. My mother writes back to each of them. She keeps their photos in the drawer of the hall table, the one by the door. My left arm reaches above my collarbone now without effort. I notice it sometimes when I'm reaching for something on a high shelf, the ease of the motion, and I note it the same way I've noted the other returns. The energy back, the full night's sleep, the morning I realized I'd gone 3 days without thinking about the diagnosis at all. You mark these things and you keep moving. You set the table with the blue plates. You drive past the gutters. You write.